Hey everyone, how's it going? Hey, how's it going? Can you guys hear me? Yeah, Will, you're a mod. I modded you. Can you guys hear me? Nice. All right, cool. All right. Welcome everyone. If you're watching this sometime in the future, you should know we do these tutorials live. So we got a couple people in chat today who are going to hang out and hopefully ask some questions. If you have questions while you're watching this tutorial, come hang out with us and watch live. And what's sort of cool about these tutorials is you can actually get your questions answered immediately. So if you're watching this and the time zone works out for you, I hope you guys can come and hang out and watch live. What are we doing today? We are building a Shiny app. So for the past couple of tutorials, I had like really specific things I wanted to show off. I wanted to show like specific things about data types. I wanted to show the stringer library. Today we are doing a Shiny app, and there's nothing sort of like really specific I want to show. Instead, I just kind of want to show like the process of uh, building a Shiny app, I guess. So I don't have anything like in particular planned. I downloaded some data from the Chicago data portal. So this data is all open, and I was just like scrolling through this through these data sets earlier today, and this CTA ridership. CTA is the bus and train system in Chicago. I just downloaded this data and I thought, hey, let's turn it into a Shiny app and just have some fun and just sort of explore it. So this is like a little bit sight unseen. But it should be fun because I'll make mistakes and we can kind of work through all that stuff together, and you can see the process of actually like building a Shiny app instead of watching one of those videos where someone just like builds an app in 10 minutes and it's hard to follow what they're doing. You can actually sort of watch the process that I go through. So, cool. With that, let's go ahead and get into it. Let me go to my RStudio window. All right. And here we go. So, like I said, I just downloaded this data, like no exploration or anything. We're just sort of like going to do this on the fly. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm starting in an empty file. The first thing you have to do when you make a Shiny app, after you give it a name, let's call it CTA ridership. Is you have to choose whether you want everything in a single file or whether you want to use multiple files. Multiple files is kind of like the old way of doing things. This used to be sort of like a hard requirement. Now you no longer sort of need to use this system, so I think you should probably prefer single files. And you can always break out sort of additional functionality at a later point, sort of once you have uh, figured out sort of the best way of breaking things apart. Um, so I just want to check real quick. I'm going to go ahead and run the sort of like default code that uses this Old Faithful data set that comes with R. And we should get it in our viewer here. Let's see. All right, I just want to check. Can you guys actually see the window that popped up? No. So I want to get this in this viewer tab here, so that ideally we can sort of keep the capture on just RStudio. But if not, that is fine. There we go. Cool. All right. So now you can see this um, here in the viewer tab. You guys with me? Um, I'll assume you guys can see this because I don't see why you wouldn't be able to. Um, nice. So, okay, this is like a really sort of straightforward example of a Shiny app, and I guess I should talk about like why are Shiny apps actually useful. They're useful because building a web app is kind of difficult. There's a lot of like extra work that goes into building a web app. And sometimes you need complete control, and you sort of want to control every little piece of the web app that you're building. Um, but a lot of the times in academic or data science work, you don't actually sort of care about all of the nitty gritty details. You just kind of want some simple inputs and some simple outputs, and that's kind of it. So that is like the nice little niche that Shiny sort of fills for you. You don't have to worry about like the styling of your app. You don't have to worry about the hosting of it. You can just throw a Shiny app up on shinyapps.io for free. It just simplifies the entire process if what you're doing is just sort of taking some simple input and displaying some plots or getting some sort of like simple data transformation that you allow the user to download, stuff like that. So you can see we have like a sort of simple slider here. And every time I move this slider, the histogram is updating with the number of bins. So this is just a really simple example of doing something with user input um, and having actually sort of automatically updating plots. So we can take a look at the code that is controlling this in a second, but basically you don't actually have to uh, define anything about sort of updating this plot. It's just sort of handled automatically, which is really nice. So, okay, let's take a look at this code real quick. I am going to keep a little bit of it. I'm going to just get rid of some of these comments here that we don't need. We do want Shiny. Oops. And while I'm up here, I'm just going to add in Lubridate, which is going to help us because there is dates in our data set, and so we'll probably need that. And then we're also going to need our ggplot and dplyr. So I'll just go ahead and load in the tidyverse here just for simplicity. And I'll just go ahead and delete some of these comments as we go. We have sort of like a title up at the top. So I'm just going to go ahead and update that with CTA ridership data. And then basically we have a sort of layout code. And so there's multiple different types of layouts that you can have when you use Shiny. I like the sidebar layout. I usually stick with it. When I'm building a Shiny app, I'm usually not too concerned about how it looks, as long as it sort of looks okay. And this looks okay enough. So good enough for the sort of stuff I build with Shiny. And so we'll go ahead and use it here. Within this layout, you basically define the stuff that goes in the sidebar, in the stuff that goes in the main panel. So in the main panel, we have our plot, and usually in the sidebar, we'll have some inputs. All of these things together make up our UI. And then we also have something on the back end, which we call server, which handles how to deal with inputs and outputs. So basically, the only thing we need to do on our back end is create a plot with this render plot function. And you can see like there's not like an if statement here that says, oh, if the slider changes, render the plot. Shiny is smart enough to know that because this value is referenced inside this render plot function, it's smart enough to, every time this changes, go ahead and render the plot again. So you don't have to deal with any of that yourself. It just kind of does it. And I think it's a beginner's mistake with Shiny to try to handle that stuff yourself because you think you have to. In fact, it's often good enough to just have a function like render plot that uses some input value, and that plot should just, in most cases, render automatically for you. So this is a really cool aspect of Shiny. If you want to sort of Google this, this is called like reactive elements. So anyway, we'll be taking advantage of that. And you can see all this is doing is sort of handling the histogram and then plotting the histogram. As long as this expression here returns a plot, then it'll get rendered for us. And as long as we assign it to sort of whatever appropriate value lines up with our UI code, it all just kind of works. Right, so then the very last thing we do is we just pass in our UI code and our server code, and then this just runs it for us. So right now it's running locally, but we could take this same code and put it online on shinyapps.io, and this could be running online in probably 10 minutes, including like the time it would take to make an account. So anyway, 42 lines of code here to get a pretty complicated web app in comparison to if you were actually coding this yourself is very, very convenient. So let's go ahead and just sort of continue making some edits here. I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of some of these comments just to kind of clean things up a little bit because these comments will soon be out of date. Okay, and actually, I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of all this code, which we don't need. We are going to render a plot at some point, but we don't know what plot we're going to render yet because I have not really taken a close look even at the data. Okay, and so I don't know if we're going to have a slider input, so I'm just going to get rid of that for now. And I'm just going to leave us with this blank sort of sidebar panel and main panel, and we'll figure out what things we actually want to put in here shortly. You can see the server function takes in the input and output. So basically the general pattern we're going to be working with is defining input things here, usually in the sidebar, and then defining sort of output values here in the server code. So that's the general pattern we're going to be working with. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop this. And what I want to do right now is just load in our data into the actual R environment. The R environment that I'm going to be working with here in the console is separate from the R environment that launches when we call this Shiny app function. So I'm going to load the data in here. It won't be available in our Shiny app yet, but I just want to go ahead and throw some plots into our viewer here, just so that we can sort of take a look at what sort of plots we might want in our actual Shiny app, like which things would be sort of the most interesting to look at. So let's go ahead and do that. I just put this file on my desktop, so I'll go ahead and grab that, and here we go. Cool. So here's our data. I'm just going to open it up. There's sort of this like confusing value here, which is day type. So W is a weekday, U is a Sunday or a holiday, and then A is a Saturday. So why it's actually coded like that, I have no idea. I won't complain too much because Chicago actually has a pretty awesome data portal, even if some of the data values are somewhat confusing. We have dates, right? So easy enough, right? We're going to parse these with LuberDate. We do have 2020 values going through April So if I sort of scroll to approximately where April is, we can see the latest date that we have. I don't know if this data set online sort of updates with quarters, but I believe this is our last date, April 30th. So we have a pretty large amount of data sort of in time-wise. We have the last 20 years of ridership data. One thing I'm sort of particularly interested in looking at is the drop-off in ridership numbers due to COVID. So that's sort of like my guiding question that I kind of want to answer with the Shiny app. So we'll get to see sort of like the trend over time, and then we'll see sort of what happens in March and April. Should be fun. These numbers are just ridership numbers for that day, right? Easy enough. So this is just the number of people who rode the bus or the train or the total of these two columns. So cool. This is our data, really simple. But we have a couple different plots we can make and sort of like play around with here. So the first thing I want to do in our Shiny app is go ahead and actually load in this data so we have access to it. I'm going to go ahead and do what I do at the beginning of any project and just use theme set here so that all of my plots are nice. They don't have that ugly gray background. I'm going to go ahead and load in the data. So I'll call it ridership and use that read CSV line that we just used. When it comes time to actually like put this into production, you'll have to make sure that you are sort of checking your paths and everything like that. I'd probably use an R project to sort of manage all that stuff for me and actually keep the data in this same folder with the rest of the code. But for now, this is sort of good enough. So, okay, we have our ridership loaded in, and the process that I sort of work with here is I will just run some code in the console and just like check that it's doing what I want. And then assuming that that is actually working correctly, then I'll just stick it up here in the Shiny app and everything should be the same. The only thing that I want to make sure I do in terms of data processing is I want the date column, whatever it is, service date. I believe this is a character string right now, so go ahead and check that. Yeah, so we want to parse this with LubraDate so that it's actual dates. When we make line plots, which is sort of like where I'm thinking of going, we want the dates to sort of work appropriately, right? Because when we opened up this data, we saw, right, these are not in time order, right? They're in sort of month and day order. If we parse them with the character order, right? Like our last day should be 2020, but it's not because it's not being sort of parsed appropriately. So anyway, LubraDate makes this really, really easy. If you've never used LubraDate, there's these like really handy functions for doing this. So I'll just show it down here in the console so you can see what's going on. I'll take this ridership service date column, and this is in month, day, year format. So LubraDate has a month, day, year function, right? MDY. So I'm going to go ahead and just run this here so that you can see. Scroll up to the top here. Hopefully we can see that these are now dates. Kind of hard to see, but if I wrap this in class, then we should see that they've been parsed correctly. Yeah. So after we use this month, day, year function, the values become dates, and so they'll sort of be ordered appropriately. So I'm just going to take this line, and I'm just going to be kind of lazy and just throw in a mutate right after I load in the data. So service state, copy that, is going to be equal to month, day, year of service state. Cool. Okay. So just to check that worked, I ran that code quickly, and now when we sort of sort by this column, we can see we're getting everything kind of correctly in time order. So 2020 is now at the end here. Cool, so that's all the data processing we had to do. We might also like recode these values if we wanted to, but I'm sort of more interested in just going in and creating some line plots and seeing how those look. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that now, and we'll sort of worry about any other recoding things we need to do later if we sort of choose to do that. So again, I'm just kind of going to put this here in the console, create some code that generates a plot, and then eventually we're going to sort of stick it here in this render plot function, and then we'll work on sort of setting up the input to actually allow the user to change things about it. But for now, let's just get like a simple plot on the screen with no actual input from the user. So on the x-axis, we can go ahead. LubriDate also has a year function, which is really handy. So we could put it by year. Let's actually just, before we do that, let's see if it looks okay as it is sort of raw. And then we'll go ahead and do, oops, we'll go ahead and do total rides. Sometimes it's nice to format this as just the year because we don't really care about the individual days that much because we have a lot of time data. But let's see how this looks first before we go and sort of make it more complicated than it needs to be. Okay. Let's see. Did I forget a parenthesis? Yes, I did. Let's try that again. There we go. Okay, awesome. So we have a plot here. And let's see. It looks like we are not grouping the way we want. That or there's like a ton of noise, but I feel like it's probably not grouping correctly. So let's do this. Let's actually try putting in color equals year service date. I think this should work. And what I'm hoping is to sort of get multiple lines of different colors all over like 1 year-long span. It might give us like multiple lines over like the entire range still. So we would have to fix that. I'm going to change this into a factor to fix the color. There we go. Oops. Let's go ahead and put this factor outside. Yeah, okay, so it's keeping this the entire range from 2001 to 2020, but I want the X range to only include the sort of months and days. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and throw a month over this. And now this x-axis should just be 1 through 12. And let's take a look. Hopefully this will work. It's taking a second. There's a lot of data. Okay, cool. So this is looking a little bit better. We have way too many lines, which is like impossible to look at, but we are getting multiple lines per year, and you can see because we have a sort of month on the x-axis here, it's just going from 1 to 12, and all these lines ended up plotted on top of each other. Okay, so because this is impossible to read, let's just take ridership outside of this call. Let's send it to filter, and let's just do year of service date should be greater than 2018. So this should give us 2019 and 2020. Cool. Okay, so still sort of impossible to look at. I will probably want to smooth this out by getting averages per month. I might summarize over month to sort of clean this up. But you could see we sort of have like some periodicity, which is interesting. This is probably the week. So like this would be like Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, maybe. Or maybe this is even Saturday, maybe Saturday, Sunday, something like that. So it's sort of showing the weeks. Not totally clear though. So we'll go ahead and get that cleaned up in just a minute. But for now, let's just take this code and stick it in here and just kind of clean up the formatting a little bit. Okay. Yeah, definitely some things we can kind of clean up here. But for now, we have sort of our ugly plot in our shiny code. So this render plot function just needs any expression that returns a plot. We're using dplyr here to do this filtering. And then we are sending it to ggplot. So that's going sort of here where the data should go, thanks to this pipe. And then this is just sort of normal ggplot code after that. So this will return our plot, which is sort of the only requirement of render plot. This can be sort of named whatever we want. I'm just going to call it ridership over time, something like that. And now this is sort of in our output. In order to actually use this, we need to put a plot here in our main panel so that we can actually see it. So I'm just going to go ahead and clear all of these plots. And then let me just make sure I do this right. We want plot output. Scroll down to the examples. Okay, cool. It's literally just plot output. Okay, and then in here we just need the name of the attribute, I guess, of the output list. So we'll just stick in ridership over time. That's what we've named it. It's not taking any input. We don't have any input. But for now, that should be good enough to sort of get our Shiny app up and running. So as you can see, right, we have our Shiny app now running. We get our plot, our ugly plot that we still need to fix. But now we can actually sort of fix it in the context of the app, which is nice. Here, this gray box, this is our sidebar. If we had a bigger viewer, yeah, there we go. You can see it actually sort of like becomes a sidebar. So in an actual web page, you would have this kind of over on the side, but because it's sort of tight here inside the RStudio viewer, it just kind of gets stuck up top. And currently there's nothing in it because we're not accepting any user input at the moment. So the first thing I want to do is just sort of turn this into something a little bit cleaner. And so we'll just do that right here. Let's go ahead and stop that for a moment. And to do that, what I want to do is just group by, oops, too much pandas, group by the month of the service date. And you know what? Because we actually are using it here, let's just give that a good name with mutate. We'll call it service month equals month service date. There we go. So that has a useful name now so that we can reference it. We'll go ahead and group by it. And then we'll throw that into a summarize call. Let's just say I'm deciding whether we should do sum or mean. Let's go ahead and do mean ridership over all of the days in the month. So we want a mean of total rides for now. Maybe later we'll sort of split by bus and train. But for now, let's just do total rides. And then we want to set total rides equals the mean of total rides. And we can go ahead and pipe that into ggplot. Okay, so I'm just doing a simple sort of group by summarize here to get the average over the service months. And now that this has a nice name, we can reference it here. Total rides now is this mean over the months. And we are no longer filtering, so this will be sort of all of the years instead of just the 2 that we had. And because we already have this mutate call nicely set up for us, I'm also going to make a service year. And then I can just copy this code. Still a factor, service date. Cool. So you can see how handy these LubrDate functions are for like pulling out the month and the year of date objects. And now that that has a nice name, we'll go ahead and stick that in the color attribute, and then I'll go ahead and click Run App. Service year was not found. Service year. Did I spell it wrong? Service date. No? Try that again. Service year not found. All right, so somewhere I'm referencing service year before it actually exists. Factor, year, service date. Oh, I am not grouping by. There we go. So I create the variable here, and then because I'm only grouping by month, I'm losing access to it. So I actually want by month and by year here. And that's sort of what I was doing wrong. That's why by the time after the summarize happens, this service year variable is gone. So, okay, like I said, we're getting errors live, and you can watch me fixing them. So, cool. All right, this is sort of what I wanted to see, right? Guess which line is 2020, right? We'll do a giveaway in the comments if anyone can figure out which one is 2020 without looking at the legend. I do sort of want to clean this up a little bit. For one, I would prefer to just have this legend go away. So let's do that. We can do that with guides, color equals false. We'll just sort of make sure that, yep, that works correctly. So that just removes that guide. The reason for that is we're just going to set, and the best way to do this probably is to do group here for service year, because we want color to just be some ugly gray. So let's just go with CCC, which is my personal favorite shade of gray. Okay, and so now we sort of have the general trend. It's not so ugly. And what we want to do is sort of like highlight this 2020 value. So let's go ahead and use annotate to do that. And we're going to say we want geom to be line, and I'm going to go ahead and stop this. Remind me how annotate works. I want to just get the year 2020. So usually the best way to do this is to have like an annotate data, which is going to be, and actually now is a good time to actually sort of separate this stuff out. So we'll have our ridership by month, year, put an underscore there. Get rid of this pipe. So I've just sort of separated this part of the code out. And we can just stick this directly in the ggplot call. We don't need to pipe that in. So thank you for your patience while I mess with formatting slightly. Okay, there we go. Okay, so the easiest way to sort of use this annotate is to do something like data equals annotate data ingonline, and then we want color to be equal to I like Firebrick2 as sort of my nice red color. And so what do we want to set this to? We want this to be filtered, and we want this service year for now to be 2020. Cool. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. I think this will work. Yep, I did mean that. Thank you. Forgot my second equal sign there. Okay. So obviously I'm forgetting how annotate works again. Can I not pass data in to annotate? Okay, so then what we'll do is we'll just turn this into a line. I think there's a way to annotate lines, but this should work for us. So let's go ahead and run this and see. Okay, cool. Ignoring unknown parameters geom. Let's go ahead and fix that quickly. Don't need this anymore because we're doing geom line. That's the call. Run that. Awesome. Cool. So I believe this is now working appropriately. We can see sort of general ridership. And we see sort of like this nice effect of 2020, the effect of COVID sort of causing CTA ridership to collapse sort of through March and April. So cool. I mean, hey, this is a shiny app. We got a plot that is interesting. We have a plot that looks sort of halfway decent. I'm not going to spend any more time sort of messing with the axis labels and sort of fixing these months, because let's actually get into the part that makes Shiny cool, which is accepting some inputs. So to do that, we need probably a slider input. So I'm just going to pull up the docs for that. Okay, we're going to have this slider input in our sidebar panel. It's very similar to the code we sort of first looked at when we started. The first argument the slider input is going to take is basically the name, like where are we going to store this value. So I'm just going to go ahead and put year, and my goal is to replace this 2020 with some other year that sort of the user can choose to highlight. So this is the label. So we'll just put like pick a year. And then because it's a slider, we'll have a min and max. And we want those to be only values that actually are available in our data. So min is going to be 2001. Max is going to be 2020. And then value is the starting value. So we'll make that 2022 because that's sort of the effect that we want to show. I think that's all we need for right now. We're not actually using this input, but let's go ahead and run our app just to make sure. Cool. Okay, well, it has like comma output, which is sort of unusual for years. But you know what? Sure. Hey, that's good enough for now. We can go ahead and mess with this stuff. I'm sure there's values inside inside slider input that allow us to sort of control and mess with those things. You know, there's like interval, which controls like animation and controlling sort of like if you want to use like a range. But, you know, we can sort of like not worry about that right now. Yeah, pretty easy, right? So let's actually access this. And so this is just going to be stored automatically in our input variable here. So we gave it the label year. So we can just reference like input year. So let's go ahead and run it. Yeah, okay, so it's not reactive yet, so we have to mess with that. So easy to put buttons and things, yeah, right? You basically just find whatever function you need. They have sliders, radio buttons, and all that stuff, and then you just kind of like stick it in, and then you just have it. Pretty convenient. Okay, so I'm getting an error here. Remember I talked about like reactivity, how oftentimes you can just kind of like stick this in and it'll just kind of do it for you. Here it's in the actual like server function. It's at like the highest level. And so it's not in a reactive context. Okay, so this render plot is like giving us a reactive context, sort of like by default. So I'm just going to go ahead and take this annotate data, and I'm just going to throw it inside render plot. You could sort of like make a different reactive context, and for like a more complicated Shiny app that might make sense. But for us, sort of, we only have this one plot that we're looking at right now, so it's easy enough to just kind of throw this in here. And it should be able to use the fact that input year is inside this function to just kind of like handle this for us. So let's go ahead and take a look at our app. Let's pull this way out. Our studio, thank you. So this is sort of like how it would normally look on a web page. We have our slider, and there we go. We're changing the value, and we're highlighting different years. So let's go ahead and try and find like which year is actually on top here. I'm kind of curious. I've definitely read articles about how like CTA ridership is declining. Okay, so this is like 2012. 2012 was a particularly good year for Chicago transport systems. And let's go ahead and highlight 2019, compare that to 2020, and cool. So now you get this huge drop off. I know I said I wasn't going to sort of mess more with our studio, please. There we go. I know I said I was going to mess more with formatting, but I just want that to like stick out a little bit more. So I'm just going to use size to sort of make that a little bit more sort of bold, so it actually kind of stands out. All right, that looks good enough. Okay, cool. So there's one more thing that I want to show, which is like one of the coolest things about Shiny, I think, like hands down, and it's partly a really cool thing about Shiny, but it's also just like a really cool thing about more the like relationship between ggplot and Shiny in particular. And so I think the stuff that I'm looking for is in plot output. Yep. So what am I talking about? What's this really cool thing? The really cool thing is like automatic interactivity. It's pretty basic interactivity, but there is interactivity that can be sort of like built in to your plots if you're using ggplot. I don't know if it works for base R plotting. I mean, I am always using ggplot, so I honestly wouldn't know. But it works for ggplot, and so it's good enough for me. And so you can see plot output here is taking in stuff like hover and brush and click. And so these are like interactive elements that Shiny and ggplot can handle for you. And so what I'm imagining is the user, they have this slider for something they want to highlight, but maybe they sort of like want to quickly scroll over the different years and look and see sort of like which year is which, sort of by hovering over the graph instead of like messing around with the slider. And so they could sort of like hover over the plot and get some sort of feedback about which year is which. So the way you sort of like control this is with this hover ops. So let's just go ahead and pull up the docs for that. And hover is going to be equal to a hover ops call, I guess. We're going to give it an ID. And let's just call this like year hover or something like that. Sure. Cool. So give me a second to remember how to actually do this. It's been a little while. Basically, there's going to be like this value that we've attached now to input, right? So you can see this input plot hover. Yeah, it's cool. I'll show you. So I build my own Shiny app sometimes, and so Will knows that one of the Shiny apps that I've created, the Shiny Eyes app that I have is basically, it's literally just using this like hover interactivity. So you can do like some pretty complex stuff with it, because I know he's seen that app and knows that it is sufficiently feature rich. Okay, so basically we're getting coordinates in this like plot hover object. And so what we defined was like the name, similar to how we gave stuff a name like here, and then referenced it here. We're doing the same thing, right? There's going to be an input year hover item, and so that's just going to be like the XY coordinates, and then so we have to figure out how to actually like handle that. No, although speaking of GG Animate, that's what I'm going to be doing next week. So if you want GG Animate stuff, that's what's coming up next Wednesday. So spoiler alert on that. Okay, so what I want to do here is just so that we can see sort of like what the data actually is looking like. I am just going to print it out to the console. And so we're going to get like a ton of values in our console, right? So you can see it like printing out here. So I'll go ahead and stop it, and we can sort of look at this. So every time I'm hovering over the plot, it's like every 300 milliseconds going to give me all this information. So I have the X and the Y value, and like what's maybe not like apparently obvious about this is X and Y values in like data space, right? This is like 20% into May, and this is like 1,400,000 riders. right? This isn't like XY like on the web page. This is like the XY data values. So you can see like how useful that can be, right? You don't have to do any work to like translate um, from like where the cursor is to the actual data values. So okay, we don't want to actually like print that out. Let's go ahead and let's just print out the ridership number, let's say. So I know I originally said um, I was going to do something with like allowing them to hover over the year, but maybe instead what could be a little bit more useful is something that shows like an exact number of where the mouse is. So we can go ahead and do that. We can use text output to just sort of like output some text. So let's pull up the docs for that, take a look, make sure I'm doing this right. We need, again, an ID. So let's just call this year hover. Yeah, sure, year hover works. Well, we already called this thing year hover, so maybe that's not ideal. Let's call this year hover output. Okay, and that's pretty much all we need to define. We don't really need a placeholder, I think. So let's just see how this looks. Notice I'm putting a comma here after this. So like main panel is a function that's like taking in these elements. So you have to like split them with commas as if they're function arguments, because they are. And so all we have to do is like assign the value that we want to this ID. So we can just do that here. Again, I'm like sort of taking advantage of the fact that this is a reactive context that we have. It's going to be kind of inefficient because on every hover, it's going to be like regenerating this plot. But for the purposes of just sort of like playing around with this, it should be fine. And actually, you know what? I don't even think we have to do that. I think we can just do this, and it should sort of handle that for us automatically. If we need to stick it in the reactive context, we will. But let's just try. Let me make my assignment consistent. Let's just try sticking this here, because I think that this will work. And now I forget what the actual argument was called, or what the sort of name of the list was. But I think it was just called Y. So let's go ahead and run this and just sort of like see how it looks. Not reactive context. Okay, so I'm going to do it the lazy way. You can make this into a reactive context, but we have one right here, and I don't think it'll be too inefficient to do this. So I'm just going to do it, and we will see how this goes. Okay, so I'm getting an error here. Let's see what's going on here. That's fine. Unexpected numeric output for year hover output. So I think we just need to turn this into a character. Let's try that again. Unexpected character output for year hover output. Let's see. Year hover output, text output. So let's make sure I'm actually doing this correctly. Let's go ahead and look at an example. Render text, that's what I forgot. And okay, so this is what I'm forgetting. So render text should make it a reactive context for us. So we'll put this out here, and now it's rendering the text for us. And we don't need to do any additional work except maybe putting that as character back. Okay, so output text, output year hover output is going to be equal to render text and our text. Cool. Okay, so I think that this needs to be text. The function is called render text. So let's try that and make this bigger. Oh, all right, here it is. I didn't even see it. This is just a warning. So yeah, you sort of have to give it a second. There's like a little bit of a delay. So let's go ahead and clean that up a little bit. The first thing I want to do is actually make it clear like what this is. So let's go back to text output. A lot of Shiny stuff has like labels that we can add. But I don't think this does. So first Google of the stream, pretty much an hour in. It's pretty good. Shiny label text output. Thank you. I don't want text input. I just want to add a little bit of text. Output ID is like what is actually attached. So it's like this year hover output. But all I want is like a little bit of text. But text output is something that needs to be rendered, and I don't want to have to render it. Yeah, well, so we have this text element, but I just want like something in front that literally can main panel just take in raw text, like / raw HTML. Maybe it can't. Verbatim text output. I don't know if that's what I want either. All right, well, no reason to sort of like waste time messing around with that because it doesn't matter too much. I do just want to try. What if I just put in raw HTML? Heading stuff, yeah, right? So is that just like if I just put like year, will this actually run? Like, can it just take in? Yeah, it can just like take in raw HTML. Man, Shiny never fails to amaze me with like how the most basic thing just like always works. Okay, so we have the year, and then the other thing I wanted to do was just like round this super ugly value right there. There we go. So let's run that. Non-numeric argument. Why is that not numeric? Yeah, okay. Non-numeric argument. As character comes after the round. So what are you? I don't know if this will work, but yeah. All right. Just want to see what class this is. If it's not numeric, I feel like I should be able to round it. It is class null. That makes sense. Okay, so we're gonna have to clean this up a little bit here. So if this is dot null, I think is a function in R. Else. There we go. All right, so what I'm doing before you are actually hovering, it's just returning null. So I'm trying to round it, which is obviously not working because you can't round null. So what I'm saying is if it's null, and let me make sure is.null is actually a function. Yes, it is. Cool. So if it's null, keep it null. If it's not null, else, round it and make it a character. Okay, one more time. Let's go ahead and run this. We have our year. We have our hover. Give it a second. Am I still printing it somewhere? Yes. Let's get rid of that. There we go. Run it again. Oh, and I labeled it year for some reason, even though it's actually ridership. Number of riders. There we go. All right, so anyway, what was the point of all this? It was so that the user could like hover and see, oh, like what was this point actually? That point right there is 1,217,914 riders. It's not ideal to have this like popping up and changing where you're hovering. So before we like end things here, I'm just gonna take these things and stick them after. So the order of things within main panel will actually control where they show up. So by doing that, now it's just going to show up here for us, which is going to be a much nicer user experience. So cool. Now, with a bit of a delay that we could sort of turn down if we wanted to, you can hover and figure out sort of like an exact value. And because I am going to be sort of picky here, the one thing I want to change in our plot before we end things is I just want to go from 0 to what is my max of ridership, total rides. So let's say, what's that, 2 million? So let's say, all right, let's say 2.5 million. Just scale our plot a little bit better so that you can see the, oh, because it is smoothed, we don't need to go nearly that high. There we go. Go up to 2 million, run it again. Cool. All right. Done messing around with it. But now you can sort of like see the drop off, the scales a little bit better. So cool. All right. Let's check all our functionality, right? So we can sort of hover to see the number of riders at any given point. And then remember, we sort of have our slider, which still works. That allows us to like pick out certain years and highlight them. Obviously, if I were sort of going to continue working with this, I would do a lot to kind of like clean up our plot and clean up the slider here. But we're already over an hour, so I think that's pretty much going to do it for today and for this week. I had a lot of fun building this. Like I said, I had not really looked at the data at all, except to kind of just look what columns were in there to make sure it would work for this demo. So in about an hour, we got what I would call a respectable Shiny app up and running. So pretty cool. I think that shows like how sort of like quick and easy it is to get these apps going relatively quickly. So cool. Well, hey, thanks Will and Chong for hanging out in the chat. Good to talk to you guys, and anyone else who's here watching or watching later on. I hope you guys will sort of say hi in the chat. Come by live if you're watching the recording. Next week, we're doing GG Animate and adding some animations to our plots. GG Animate is probably like one of my top 5 R packages. I use it all the time in my own work because I think it just helps in sort of like an exploratory data context to just figure out what's going on quickly in very kind of dense data spaces. So we're going to be talking about that. It should be a lot of fun, and I hope to see you guys there. Cool. All right. See you guys next time.